I guess one could call her the queen of musical schemata, as there is something sublime and elevating about it. Everybody loves the so-called Romanesca, and it's indeed likely one of the most prominent schemata, and that is surely for some reason. In fact, this particular schema strikingly reappears in numerous renowned and celebrated compositions, either as exposed or crucial ingredient, or as well as popular openers such as in Beethoven's late E major sonata, all-time keyboard classics like this one, and, as an example that received a certain hype just recently, an orchestral operatic interlude by Rameau. This recording was on top of the Spotify suggestions of the artist's page when you would enter Rameau's name in the search box. Until the time it's been excelled by a somewhat tacky piano interpretation of the same piece by Víkingur Ólafsson. Wait. Over 10 million clicks? What the f? The other reason for the Romanesca's prominence is with high probability its exposed spot within Bob Gjerdingen's Music in the Gallant Style, where it appears as very first schematic example right after the introduction. Besides that, the Romanesca schema, in comparison to others, is of limited complexity and doesn't imply as many intricacies as others, so it's absolutely attainable for beginners. Let's just have a quick look at its fundamental conditions. There's basically two different bass lines. On the left is the historically older version that consists of leaping fourths and ascending seconds. On the right, the stepwise descent from the first to the third degree that includes sixth chords. Looking just from a harmonic perspective, both contain the same chord roots and their sound is somewhat similar. But as similar as these may appear, there are different implications regarding possible dissonances, diminutions, and especially stylistic features. So it's probably better to discuss one after another. The leaping Romanesca usually covers two different guidelines in the upper voices that produce a purely consonant counterpoint, one beginning on the first degree, the other one on the third. Both melodic lines can be combined in the same example, as their combination reveals a clean parallel motion of thirds and sixths when exchanged. Now the crux. If you shift the melodic line that begins on the first degree a quarter towards the right, you gain a nice chain of suspensions, which is a most prevalent manifestation of the Romanesca, which you'll find scattered all over the European Baroque, be it Italy, France, Germany, or whatsoever. This is what it sounds like. As a basic procedure, I want to introduce some standardized bass diminutions that are derived from this exact skeleton, in which the upper voices work as a double counterpoint fabric, which means that those are exchangeable. These examples should be studied, understood thoroughly, and transposed to several major and minor keys, including the voice exchange. In this one, like in all following examples, you'll still recognize the pillars of the bass line on the downbeats and the gaps between them being somewhat filled with smaller note values. Just like in the preceding example, you can recognize that integrating smaller note values will change the indicated thorough bass figuration, which can be quite confusing as the upper voice fabric stays completely intact. This one integrates broken chords, and this time I demonstrate the possibility of exchanged upper voices. Now I want to show at least a single exemplary diminution of the upper voices that's based on the suspension scaffolding. The bass line is a slightly varied version of the previous one. Now let's have a look at the stepwise variant. I told you that this is essentially the same chord progression as the leaping variant. The main difference between the two is probably that the stepwise variant usually doesn't contain any dissonances, so it's of somewhat less complexity. I'd say that in case of the stepwise variant, one should know at least two best practice voice leading strategies for the soprano. The first one would be a motion in parallel thirds to the bass line. The second one is a leaping soprano that creates alternating thirds and sixths. Here's a little diminution example that's just made of broken chords, but you can still recognize the central pitches of the scaffolding. For further instructions concerning the topic of diminutions on the stepwise Romanesca, I want to recommend Nicola Canzanos' channel and especially the episode on figuration preludes, as it happens to be the stepwise Romanesca and its figurative potential that he's examining. Now it's gonna be two original examples that don't stem from the Baroque era but from the early 19th century. And this time somebody else is gonna do the dirty work, so let's see what happens.
Most of you will be familiar with the G major sonata opus 79. And the third movement of that sonata and so let's play now this as the chorale, just the harmonies.
Which contains parallel octaves, but I'm just saying.
Now I transpose it down a third to E major and just add a few little figurations. And I think it sounds quite familiar then.
If the audience finds this demonstration already hilarious, they definitely should watch this video. They probably wet their pants. I know I've been a bit cheeky here, no offense. So, Master Schiff basically demonstrated that both beginnings rely not just on the same chord progression, but as well on the exact same contrapuntal scaffolding. But somehow, I do have the assumption that he's aiming at some sort of intentional reference or self-citation, because Schiff is arguing about such cases quite frequently, and I've seen him performing this particular demonstration on a lecture concert in my hometown several years ago, and already back then I had a bad belly about it. I can't get rid of the feeling that he, without explicitly telling, is drawing the deduction that there's a higher incomprehensible ingenious connection which I tend to recognize as an ideological component of a romantic and unprogressive view on music history that I used to call the master's narrative, that especially conveys a distorted notion about what's originality and what's actually learnable compositional craft. Hence, I don't quite understand what this demonstration was actually about to show when it keeps back the information that this music is derived from a universal musical building block. But maybe I just don't like masterclasses, and maybe I just don't like smug laughter of sophisticated audiences. Anyway, back to basics. Now some examples that are based on the leaping variant. You're about to see two French rondeaus that both show a certain specific variant of the schema as opener, in which the Romanesca has been interwoven with the cadence. The first one is taken from a Rameau suite in E minor. The theme consists basically of two equal parts that just differ in the strength of the cadence. First ending imperfect, second one perfect. You probably recognize that the bass line pretty much resembles the original leaping variant. But instead of the root position chord on the third degree, Rameau chose to take the sixth chord to immediately initiate the cadence. So the Romanesca and the standard 3-4-5-1 are combined in the manner of a chain link. But let's compare this to Couperin, because in this most famous example you'll recognize exactly the same strategy that's been covered behind a completely different figurative layer. This piece is quite a different one. Couperin produces a rich sound by using a specifically low register and by overlapping tones from chord to chord to create the characteristic lead ring effect of the style brisé. On the layer of scaffolding and syntactical matters, Rameau and Couperin are quite equal. Both interlace the leaping Romanesca with the 3-4-5-1 cadence, which seems to be a very common 18th century opener. Same bass line, complete different music, isn't it? Besides these differences, there is something innocent, naive and pantomimic in both pieces, and especially the appearance of the Romanesca seems to support this connotation. I tried to enter this compositional sphere and wanted to come up with an own French-style Rondeau-theme that captures the same pantomimic vibe, but that's based on the entire Romanesca. The salient feature of such a Rondeau-theme is a recognizable period that's not too complicated in structure and that provides a specific and catchy hook. In other words, high compositional aims. This is what my attempt sounds like. You can recognize the entire sequence in the first half. I tried to realize a very simple counterpoint that's exclusively based on thirds. Unlike in the two original examples, I placed a half cadence in the middle instead of an imperfect authentic cadence. In the second half, I followed the strategy of the aforementioned examples by weakening the sequential aspects, using the dominant seventh and initiating the final cadence throughout the sixth chord on the 3. So the characteristical overlapping of Romanesca and cadence that we had in the original examples, and that's it. I already told you that the Romanesca is applicable to 19th century keyboard styles, so I'm gonna finish with a brief, rather romantic attempt that contains nothing less than 3 Romanesca cycles.